we live in a world where people are constantly saying, you should do something great. You should do amazing things in games. Let's make everyone amazing. And so to turn around and go, oh, well, hey, let's do some boring stuff. You turn around and you go, what? That's rubbish. No. But there's something really good behind it. I mean, so I think firstly, it's an expression of that idea that you should just say the thing in your head. You shouldn't be self-filtering. You shouldn't be going, I should come up with a really great idea. You just sort of say the boring thing.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, the podcast where I delve into the minds of tabletop gaming creatives. Join me as I uncover their creative process and inspirations. You are in the right place if you enjoyed listening to thoughtful interviews with creative people.
Hi, this is Jay Stratman.
Hi, this is B. Marsolier.
When we're not running...
You do when we're not, and I'll do Tabletop Talk.
Okay, I see. When we're not talking about science fantasy, is that okay? When we're not talking about science fantasy to each other? Okay, yeah, cool. All right, let's just try it again. This is Jay Stratman. When I am not designing games, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
This is B. Marsolier. When I'm not fiddling with tarot cards, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. My guest today is Graham Walmsley. Many of you know Graham by name. He wrote Cthulhu Dark, Play Unsafe, and numerous scenarios for Trail of Cthulhu, as well as many other games. This Emmy award-winning creator has a new game coming out, which I'm very excited about, Cosmic Dark. Graham, welcome to the third floor.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really great to be here.
So you are going to be subjected to the same stupid question you get on every stupid podcast you've ever been on, which is at one point you knew nothing about tabletop gaming and it was put in front of you for the first time. Can you tell me your origin story? Can we go back there?
I don't think I've ever been asked this. I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I started playing when I was a teenager. And so this was... Right, so I have to set the scene a bit. So, this was before the internet. And so these were the days when you would walk into a shop. And so I walked into W.H. Smith, which was our local kind of newsagent, everything shop. And so the first role-playing game I got was Tunnels and Trolls. And I was probably about 12 or 13. Tunnels and Trolls is, still a really great game. But the game we started playing, because we started playing at school and sort of with school friends, the game we started playing was Dungeons and Dragons. And then we went on very quickly to, just playing every Saturday. We actually didn't play Dungeons and Dragons much. We played Toon.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's a great
absolutely classic game. But you can imagine, like, for 12 or 13-year-olds, there was an easy in there, right? It was an easy, fun game to play every week. That was good. And the other one was one called Golden Heroes, which... I don't know that one. So it's a British superhero game by a guy called Simon Burley, who's still about. And... it was, in those days, it was just awesome. This big glossy book, and you roll percentile die and it gives you the power every time you roll percentile. Yeah, that was just amazing. So it was. That's how I got in.
Well, interesting, Graham. So you started with D&D.
Yeah.
But you said you quickly moved over to two other games. Do you have a sense now, looking back on it, why did you guys stray so early from the cornerstone game?
I think it's because I had a deep knowledge inside that I was a narrativist. No.
That's interesting.
No.
I
don't know. No, I don't know. I mean, I just it's an interesting one. I feel D&D, and so we played a lot of D&D, right? People would draw the dungeons, and we. It was the day the Indiana Jones movies were being released, and so in every dungeon, I remember this, we would have an Indiana Jones room where there would be some replica of like some stunt in an Indiana Jones movie, as rolling under a
beautiful,
so good, like falling portcullis you had to roll under or something. It's brilliant. But I also think there was like a sense in which D&D just took a bit of emotional investment, and well, there's something quite serious and epic about D&D, and I think for 12 and 13-year-olds it was much easier to play Toon, which you don't need to do a dungeon for Toon. I mean, just have a sketch of a scenario, Golden Heroes, and you just throw maps on the table, and I think that was just kind of more appealing and bright and fun,
So when did you become horror curious? When did that come into your gaming world?
Well, so much later. So, I mean, what happened was, I went to university and, did other things, just drifted away from tabletop gaming. And it wasn't until, I think, 2000, and I moved to California for my job, and I got into Vampire the Masquerade LARPing, so Mind's Eye Theatre. Like, a friend invited me along, and I was like, yeah. But even so, that's kind of not quite horror gaming, and so I think through that I got back into. I think I went through Vampire, and then I remember there was like a. This is totally not answering your question. I'm just sort of telling you the story, really. I remember a new edition of Paranoia was being released, and I loved Paranoia. There's another one we used to play back in the day, and I was very excited about this. It was Paranoia XP, which was the one by Alan Varney, and it was a beautifully written one. It was a really, really beautifully written game, really funny, and I think what happened from there was that sort of. In the back of Paranoia XP, it credits The Forge. So indie game design, it specifically credits My Life with Master. And so through that, I kind of got back into sort of indie gaming and horror and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you because I predominantly know your work as horror, just for obvious reasons. Are you just a fan of that genre from a gaming perspective, or do you consume movies and books and everything? Is it something that you love outside of gaming?
That's so interesting. I think the truth is I'm quite scared of horror. So I'm not someone who sits down and watches many horror films because they scare me. But I don't think that's a bad reaction. I'm not sure I'd want to be one of these people who. There's very good horror writers. I mean, Scott Dorward does consume loads of horror movies.
Yes, he does.
And so actually, I don't consume sort of a huge amount of horror content. But I do. I mean, I do read a lot of quite weird psychological horror. I do. I've been on a folk horror kick recently, so I've been watching sort of all the old classic folk horror films. So no, I'm not really a horror fan as such, but I love it as a genre.
Yeah, so it's super interesting to me, right? So is it a function, Graham, because of the amount of agency in a gaming sphere that horror is more attractive to you? Even though as a genre in gaming, it tends to be the one where we're removing agency. I'm trying to figure out, Graham, why do I know you because of your horror writing? Why is that in gaming a part of you?
I mean, I think that starts from Trail of Cthulhu. Which is... So Trail of Cthulhu was the first horror stuff I did. So I think in about 2007, 2008, I was in a gaming group with Simon Rogers, who was the publisher of Trail of Cthulhu. And I think as part of that, I went away and read some Lovecraft. And it really freaked me out. It was, but in a really interesting way. And I remember having a shower afterwards and sort of feeling slightly dirty. But that's really interesting, right? I mean, I think any kind of fiction that gets you into a different headspace like that, I think there's something very powerful about it. And I think what I realised was actually a lot of the horror scenarios I was playing weren't quite getting me into the headspace. They didn't quite. They didn't feel like a Lovecraft story, and they actually, a lot of horror scenarios, including like Call of Cthulhu stuff I played, didn't actually feel horrific. So there wasn't actually a moment where you kind of went, "Oh, that's nasty," and I think I wanted to chase that, and so that led to the Trail of Cthulhu scenarios I wrote, which were pretty much an attempt to do some sort of Lovecraftian weirdness. And then it developed from there. So, I mean, I think the answer to that, I mean, the straight answer is because I've done Trail of Cthulhu stuff and I've done Cthulhu Dark. But I also, I think what I do quite well with horror is I write stuff which is genuinely weird and slightly creepy. And so I think that's sort of why I've come across as a horror author.
And I agree with that. What I don't have a clear sense of for you, though, Graham, is like weird and creepy, which you are very, very good at. But you push it into that horrific space, which I think is why I can read a scenario and go, I'll freaking bet you Graham wrote this. And I want to know for you, what pushes it in your mind over to that horrific area where you feel like I'm not just throwing stuff at you. I'm not just freaking you out and making spiders crawl out of your mouth. I'm creating something very horrific here. Do you understand what that bar is that you're able to jump over, or is it just so unique per scenario?
This is interesting because I know the questions broadly that are coming up in this, and we're preempting loads of them.
Oh, I do that all the time. I should have told you don't look at the call sheet because I destroy it.
There's a couple of things. One of the reasons is the stuff I write is just the stuff that's obvious to me.
Okay.
The other thing is, by the way, I don't really see a line between weird and horror. Like all my horror stuff is just like weird, and it's getting weirder and it's getting weirder. I don't think there's a moment where it, I go, now we're going to go for full on horror. But I mean, everything I write is just what seems obvious to me.
That's cool.
We're going to talk about sort of improvisation. So I wrote a book called Play Unsafe, and one of the things in that is be obvious, say the obvious thing. And I remember I was writing a horror scenario which had little white plants growing everywhere. So this is one of my Cthulhu apocalypse scenarios. You'd have these little white plants growing, just taking over the country and just sweeping over, poisoning the water, everything. And to me, it's just completely obvious if you have these little white plants everywhere, then when you turn on the tap, it's going to come out as all white and milky. And if you find a corpse, then it's going to have these plants growing out of it and sort of starting to decompose it and feeding it. And to me, that is just the next logical step. But I say that to someone and they go, that is weird.
Yep.
that is really unpleasant. And then I kind of take a step back and I go, no, it is actually, isn't it? Yeah. but it's not, this isn't me kind of, well, it is partly me kind of go, oh, let's explore this really nasty body stuff. Right. But it's not, I am just sort of,
I think I understand what you're saying. It sounds to me like, Graham, what you do is you keep walking down the road farther and farther and farther. Yeah. And because it was a weird right turn to begin with, it just gets more and more and more as you go. And that makes a ton of sense to me. And I think that it's very possible, even though I was making a distinction, it was one that maybe isn't required, right? That there may not be a difference between weird and horrific for you, and that the two are melded together. So that makes total sense to me. But
also, how much when people are writing horror, do they genuinely try and explore disturbing stuff? Right. Or how much do they just kind of put a star vampire in and hope that does the job? So, I mean, I think when I write stuff, I am genuinely just chasing these little creepy moments. Go, oh, that's creepy. I'm going to have it. Or in my everyday life, I'm kind of, I went into hospital about a year ago, and I was just like, oh, I just suffered the most unimaginable pain I've ever had. that's going in a scenario at some point. And so I'm almost just like collecting these little moments or collecting these moments that are coming up in my head and actually chasing that horror. And I don't know if lots of horror writers actually try and write horrific stuff.
I don't know if I know the answer to that either. It's very, very interesting. It's my personal favorite genre, not only from a gaming perspective, but also from a media perspective. So I'm one of those people that not only likes to play and run horror, but I love to watch horror as well. And the entire genre I find very fascinating. And some of the most normal people I know love horror, which breaks the kind of the stereotype, which like that people have. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and methods for crafting their creations. We've hinted at Play Unsafe. I'm going to dig into Graham's mind and see where I can find this came from. We'll be right back.
Robin is a notorious art thief. Fox is a well-respected special agent. Will Fox catch Robin? Will Robin get away? And before the end, will they kiss? Kiss Me If You Can is a two-player rom-com romp about art heists and love, coming this July from me, Sam Dunawald, host of the games podcast Dice Exploder. If you want to make your own rom-com in under an hour with someone you enjoy flirting with, go to Kickstarter now and follow Kiss Me If You Can.
I've been trying to think, Graham, where I first came across your work, and it may have been in Trail of Cthulhu. I have Cthulhu Dark, and I have Play Unsafe, and there was a period of time where I didn't realize it was the same person that wrote both.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if I'd like pulled out Play Unsafe, and I looked at the front cover again. I went, oh shit, that's Graham too. But let's talk about that book, because it's a book that constantly comes up in my interviews. So I talk to creators from all over the world. I do. And people will cite your work, and they will cite this book. And for a book that, is thinner than my index finger.
Yeah.
From it's an easy, quick read. It's funny how often it comes up in my conversations. So before we kind of dig into the content of it, you could have never written it, right? These are ideas that you've had. You could have kept them to yourself, talked about them with friends. Where was the first impetus to say, I need to write this stuff down?
So it was 2006, and I'd spent a few. By the way, it's nice that this all interview is structured, so I think I'm just going to tell you my life story here.
I'm here for it.
Here we are. So yeah, we've missed out the sort of 10 years playing with synthesizers, but anyway. So it's 2006, and I started posting on the Forge just before that, and starting to hash out a couple of ideas and sort of learning a bit of stuff. And what happened was that a lot of the sort of indie action moved from the Forge, one website, to Story Games, a much more kind of chatty, discussive website. And you have to imagine a world which is kind of difficult now. You have to imagine a world where actually lots of the indie RPG design, as we know it, was happening on one website. And the way you announced a game is you said to these people on this website, hey, I'm doing this game. And so lots of people designing games and publishing them. Print on demand was this sort of still relatively new thing that you could publish 100 books, and you didn't have to do a print run of 1,000 books. So it was getting much easier to publish books, and we were interested in narrative structure because we were moving away from these GM-led games where essentially the GM held the story and everyone played their characters and the GM sort of guided them through the world. And I think we were interested in sort of cracking this problem of, if people are collaborating to tell a story, how does that work? Mm-hmm. Around that time, I think that the most common way of doing it was scene framing. I frame a scene, you frame a scene, and we have some mechanics in the background around that. Usually I frame a scene, I roll dice. You frame a scene, you roll dice at the end of that scene. And I'd done some improvisation training.
Okay.
And so this is improvisation training in the style of a guy called Keith Johnston, who's so he's he used to be a British theatre director, but then he moved to Canada, and so you get a lot of sort of improv training, but a particular chunk of it in the UK is based on the methods of this guy Keith Johnston, and a lot of it is, it's guidance. It's kind of guidance of how to improvise a story. So the simple one that everyone knows is yes and. So you say something, and instead of me going, that's not true at all, that's rubbish, I go, yeah, that's right, and you go, okay, so there's a tower in front of us, and instead of going, no, there's not, I go, yes, this massive ancient green tower covered in leaves, and there's something shining at the top. And I just thought there was something in all this Keith Johnston stuff that could feed the conversation. And I started a blog. So at first it was blog posts. And people seemed to like them, and eventually, and I think this is partly because I didn't have a game at the time, right? I didn't have a game to publish. I wasn't really confident in my own games, and so I thought, but I do have this, so let's see if anyone wants to sort of read this book of player advice, and I put it together. And I expected to sell 20 copies, literally. I thought I'm going to be happy if I sell 20 copies, and it sold much more than that. It keeps selling. That's
it's a very unique book, Graham, for a lot of reasons. One being is the last thing we need is one more book of advice for GMs.
Okay,
we're good. We've got those.
I mean,
right? There's a lot of those.
But fine.
It's unique because it's a book for players, right? Which I think is an underserved area, is advice for how can I be a good player? Not good at it like it's a sport, but a generous player, a player that is contributing to the table and contributing to that play experience, which I really love. What I'm still going to need to dig into here, though, Graham, is the need to write it down. The need to share it. Do you know where that comes from? Because again, these could have been ideas that you thought of, that you liked, that you would bring up in conversations with your friends on the Forge. But there's something that's in you that said, I need to put this on a blog post. I need to put this out there. And I'm trying to understand where that comes from. And if it's just unique to gaming, or is this how you always do things? That you need to publish and perform and put things out?
Well, it's not something I'd ever done before, but I mean, you have to understand sort of being in this little self-publishing community where the impetus was everyone was saying, you can do this, you can publish, and it's very, very powerful, and people are getting behind you. And so people are always saying everything you're reading on this website is basically going, this is something you can do. You should publish. Right. You should, whatever you've got, you should publish. And I don't think it was particularly the case that I started this blog and everyone was like, oh, you should publish this. But nevertheless, that atmosphere was there. And of course, I wanted to play around with this stuff. I wanted to kind of play around with a layout program and then upload it. And then, of course, I wanted to sort of, order this thing I've uploaded into this shiny book and just see what it looked like. Of course, I wanted to play around with that. So, you're saying, where does it come from? But that's what we were doing, was publishing the stuff. Yeah.
So it sounds like that was the culture, and that support system was there.
Yeah.
It was obvious.
I think so. I mean, I have to say now, it wasn't supportive to everyone, right? And especially. I have a couple of women friends who will say it was really quite a gatekeeping thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's not the first time I've heard that. Because
looking back,
the entire,
I think it's true,
yeah. And what's interesting for me is I had a bit of a Rumpelstiltskin with gaming because I was very much into it in my young years, teenage years, college years, and then left role playing games and came back to it 5-6 years ago. And I was leaving the world of GURPS and Champions and 3rd edition D&D, and I come back to what we have now, and I'm like, what the hell happened? Like, what have all of you been doing? Because it had changed so much from when I had, stopped role playing and came back to it. So part of the reason this podcast exists is me trying to fill in everything that happened in between and talking to people. And that was a long way for me to say that I was not into gaming at the time when the Forge was happening, and then when the split happened from the Forge. But I've heard that there was some challenges around the inclusiveness of some of that community. So that's not the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, I think that was in the early days, and I wasn't an early Forge person, right, either. So I wasn't in the sort of Vincent Baker, Paul Sager era. So I came in on the tail end of that. But my impression was there's a lot of diversity and very deliberate diversity around games this time, which is a very good thing. But my impression is that it took a while for that to come, and it was
right.
I don't want to put a date on it exactly, but there was, for a long time it was men talking to each other, and then
the hobby has been dominated by men for so very long.
Yeah,
and not just men, but like cis white men.
Absolutely, right? Yeah.
That was, I think, it's funny for me, Graham. One of the other things that I noticed when I came back is. And I loved it immediately. I'm like, there's so many different people playing games
Absolutely.
now. And there's so many different people making games now. And it's those things are not coincidental, right? That I see that the hobby has flourished and blown up and is now capable of far more than I ever thought it was when I was at university playing.
Yeah, and let's credit the people, right? I mean, there was some absolutely groundbreaking designers who I think probably went through a lot of shit to do that. So, so I mean, the people in the, I remember Julia Ellingbo's game Steal Away Jordan, which was astonishing. So a game about slavery in the United States, Emily Boss's. Breaking the Ice was an amazing game, but then there were the games like Dog Eat Dog, and then Avery Alder. So their game, Rip and Drive, but then especially Monster Hearts, and I think especially with Monster Hearts, that this idea of role playing games that the idea of a sort of queer role playing game just really broke through at that point to me. And I'm very aware I have a very naive point of view about all this, and maybe all this was happening and I wasn't noticing. But for me, there was this real groundswell of things, and you could see some of the shoots in the early days. But the sort of very diverse world that we have now in gaming was down to some incredible people. Yeah,
no, I agree. I had such a great conversation with Avery, and their new game. Coming out, I just backed it. That is simulating a sitcom. Yeah. Cannot wait to get my hands on this game, just because I know the quality it's going to be, and I know that just like every other game that I've read of them by them is like there's just something in there. I'm like, holy shit! Like I don't think I've seen anything like this before, and then it just changes everything.
No, I totally agree. I mean. Monster Hearts was a really fun game to play. The one I played very recently, because I never got the chance to play, was The Quiet Year.
Oh, God, it's so good.
It's incredible, but I mean, it just feels like one of those things that's lodging in my head and kind of go, oh, you can do that with a game. There's little bits of technology there, like the idea of you have a. If you want to start a project, you say what the project is, and you have a die, and it just sort of ticks up, and there's no predefined list of projects. They can be what you want. And I was like, oh, that's very clever. So it's a bit narrative and it's a bit quantitative. Just think, just little bits of the technology in Avery's games are incredible.
I agree. Let's get back to the book. So there's a couple things that we hear a lot, and that stand out to me as being evocative. And I have a feeling when you were writing some of this stuff, Graham, you were doing it on purpose to be evocative in a great way. You tell everybody be average. And we've learned from the last segment that some of this advice is not only for players, but it sounds like you do it as a writer as well. What does that mean? So if I were to sit down with a table and go, you would be a much better player if you would just be average. Why does that work for you? And what does it mean? So
firstly, this is a Keith Johnston phrase. So it's not.
Oh, I don't think I know that.
It's not mine. Yeah, the idea that you should try and be boring. I think it's coming from a couple of places. I mean, I think the easiest way to explain. Right. So firstly, this is a really hard thing, right? Because we live in a world where people are constantly saying, you should do something great. You should do amazing things in games. Let's make everyone amazing. And so to turn around and go, oh, well, hey, let's do some boring stuff.
Right.
You turn around and you go, what? That's rubbish. No. But there's something really good behind it. I mean, so I think firstly, it's an expression of that idea that you should just say the thing in your head. Mm-hmm. Right. You shouldn't be self-filtering. You shouldn't be going, oh, I should come up with a really great idea. You just sort of say the boring thing. So the tower's in front of you. What do you do? Oh, I climb it. What's on the top of the tower? And you don't sit there thinking, oh, there's tentacles reaching out and they've got this cosmic. You just go, oh, there's a light shining. And so I think partly it's an expression of that. Partly it's because actually boring things can be really quite interesting. So I think in an improvisational sense, doing something which seems boring on a stage can be actually fascinating watch. You sit down at a desk and start writing on a stage. In your head, that's quite a boring thing, but it's quite compelling. I think there's a lot of that. And then I think it's sort of to go back to the idea that, say the thing in your head. Mm-hmm. Even if you think it's boring, it might not be boring to other people. And so for me, there's something... I really like surrealist art. And
okay.
One of the things about the surrealists in the 1920s and 1930s was they were very interested in getting in touch with sort of unconscious impulses, and that's a thread which runs throughout Johnstonian improvisation. And so I think, especially in a horror sense, this idea of being obvious, so saying the obvious thing in your head, actually that obvious thing, the thing, you've just asked me a question and you go and you go, oh yeah, there's a red light there. In a sense, that's kind of been wrenched out of your subconscious. I realise I'm being a bit pretentious here, but there's something in it. No, right?
I'm spoken what you're growing. Keep going.
Yeah. So there's a sense that actually what your unconscious just spits out without you thinking can be really actually not boring and very fresh and interesting. Can I just give you an example, actually? Sorry.
Please.
Yeah.
No, please.
You were talking about the Cosmic Dark sessions that Ain't Slayed Nobody have been running.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm allowed to advertise another podcast on that.
Oh, please do. Please do. I mean, I love what they do on that podcast.
Yeah, I think really...
what I love the most is that they're not playing D&D, that they're playing games that don't get enough coverage. And I absolutely love that. So yeah, by all means, Ain't Slayed Nobody is a wonderful show.
Ain't Slayed Nobody is absolutely fantastic. So there's a wonderful moment in that campaign where I'm asking questions at the start of the game. So the setup of Cosmic Dark is that, at the start, this sort of anonymous voice asks you questions and you give answers, and those answers are going to come back later in the scenario.
So good.
It's very creepy. And so what happens to that game is that, the characters at the start of the scenario, sort of, they go to sleep, and in their sleep, this voice asks them as they're on the verge of sleep, this voice asks them questions. And I remember this moment that I asked Bridget, so Bridget Jeffries, who's one of the players in that campaign. I asked, if you had to murder one of your team, who would it be? And after about 30 seconds of swearing at me, the answer that just came out of her head was Terence. And there was something so powerful in the fact that she hadn't tried to come up with an interesting answer. She just said this thing that was just came out of her mouth, and it was just the name of this other character. And I think that's the thing you're talking about, right? That, you know, actually the thing that's just kind of ripped out of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing.
First off, shout out to her, because like she's playing with very good players. And she's stealing the show. Like she's just a phenomenal player. Like I would kill to have her at one of my tables, because I find she's one of those players that I find so compelling, because, and this is ties to what we're talking about, there's an honesty to her play that I like. I just really enjoy listening to her play, because I believe all of it. And it ties to what we're talking about, right? She's being obvious for her. And that honesty comes out in that play. One of the things, and you get into it a little bit, but I feel like in the book there's space left here, and it's an idea that I have been talking to friends with. It's a very unbaked idea for me, and there's a lot of conversations about it, and that's the idea of playing a story versus a story emerging in play.
Right.
And I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, right? So scenario one is I have a Graham Walmsley Trail of Cthulhu scenario in front of me, and I am going to tell this story. And if you want to sit at the table and have a character sheet, that'd be great. But you're going to go through my story that I'm going to tell, versus the idea of we're going to sit down and I'm going to say, this is how the world is. This is how things start. Now let's play. And magically, somehow, even a narrative structure seems to just naturally emerge from that play. And and story ends up becoming a product of play versus the goal of play. Does any of this make sense to you?
Yes, it's so hard.
Right. Craig, it was great talking to you. I got to go.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for that question. I need to go. Yeah, it's so hard because I think there's like two things I can say, right? What I want to say, and I think this is partly true, is that I don't think there's a difference between the two. So when I write a horror scenario, in which you're descending deeper and deeper into this bad stuff happening around you, it's not really about me revealing the horror. So if you're running one of my scenarios, I don't want the pleasure of one of my scenarios be everyone's waiting to find out the next thing in the scenario, because that would be rubbish. I think it's much more about I'm sort of providing this escalating horror, and the real story is what's happening between the players. So what's happening with them, what's happening to them personally, what we know about their backstories and how that's coming up. So in a sense, I don't think there's a distinction. I don't think you're playing through that story. I think you are. I'm just giving you a backdrop so you can tell your own story. But having said that, I do think there's a distinction, and I almost think it's two quite different forms of pleasure in a game. The pleasure of co-inventing a story, all that pleasure, which I've had at a convention, because sometimes you want to go along to a convention table and sit down with the GM and kind of go, okay, you've done some prep, and I want to explore your world and find out about it. And no, I don't want to contribute to that world very much. I'm going to play a character, but I don't want you to say, what do you think should happen? I want you to sort of, I want to explore this thing you've spent a long time creating. And so I do think that's a real thing. And I think they're two quite different pleasures of gaming, the thing where you're inventing stuff between the players, which I love to do, and the thing where the GM has done all this work and they're kind of going, and here is this thing. And that's fun as well.
Yeah. It is definitely not a scenario where I'm exploring to figure out which one's the right one, right? But what I'm exploring and trying to learn and understand is there a difference? And if there is, what is that difference and what it might mean? And it's interesting to hear your perspective on that, especially from a horror, because I think about the games that I have run in the past that stick with me, right? Not every game I've run stays with me. Some I can never get rid of, that they occupied my brain. And all of them, when I think about it, have been not when the big bad shows up, not when the horrific thing happens. It's always been those character moments where we found out something about what was just a sheet of paper with a bunch of numbers on it, and they become real.
Yeah.
That's the magic for me. The last piece before we talk about Cthulhu Dark is, do you have any tips or techniques that you use as a GM to encourage the type of unsafe play you've written about? Are there ways that you can make it something that maybe somebody who has not read your book, is there something as a GM that we can do to help encourage that type of unsafe play?
I think it's some quite dull things, to be honest. I mean, the first thing is you can tell the players that they're welcome to invent things. I think asking questions is probably the most powerful thing in a way. So, a player says, "Oh yeah, I grew up. I grew up on the lower levels of the asteroid," and you're like, "Okay, yeah, talk about that. What does it look like?" And so just giving them permission to do that, I think, is really powerful.
And I'm finding not only that can that be powerful, Graham, but also making it matter, right? So if I'm asking those types of questions, if I'm opening that up for players, making sure that I'm listening to their answers and building off of that and actually incorporating it, which I think is some of the magic I'm seeing with Cosmic Dark, but I'm getting way ahead of things.
No, it's true. I like the way you're saying that as quite a nice thing. I mean, it's also quite an evil thing to do. And this is something Bridget has a go at me about. It's quite fun because I'm saying, so tell me a bit about where you grow up, and I do write it down, and I'm ready to bring it back later. So you're saying you read comic books. What's your favorite comic book? Well, I'm not. I'm writing down the answer to that because that's coming up later. In a weird way. There is a thing. So. We're talking about Cosmic Dark, which starts with, it starts with me. Every scenario with Cosmic Dark has this bit at the beginning where, in your sleep, the spaceship computer asks you questions, and that's deliberately designed to give the GM things to bring back later. And Bridget realised that as we were playing that campaign. So every time I started asking a question, she was like, that shit's coming back later. Don't tell him anything.
She was too. She was just like, she would call you bad words when you would ask a question, which I loved.
She kept saying she hated me.
Yeah, it was really, it was fantastic. So guys, we're going to take a break. When we get back from this break, maybe after Play Unsafe, I don't know what people are more familiar with, whether it's Cthulhu Dark or whether it's Play Unsafe. It doesn't matter. We're going to talk about Cthulhu Dark. We'll be right back. I've got a lot of questions about Cthulhu Dark, but I think I should start by saying, reading a little bit of the blurb. So for those that maybe you're listening that aren't familiar with the game, they'll get an understanding. Cthulhu Dark is a tabletop role-playing game of cosmic horror in the style of H.P. Lovecraft. It's about the things we fear, amplified until they're unbearable. It's about stories that genuinely creep you out, not well-worn tropes and creatures you've seen hundreds of times before. It's about bleak horror in which humans are powerless when confronted by hyper-intelligent alien horrors. You can't beat them. You can't fight them. You can only watch, run, hide, and fear. So I think my first question is, we have Call of Cthulhu. We have Trail of Cthulhu. We have Cthulhu Fate. The idea of a game that emulates the type of horror that H.P. Lovecraft started, and it was continued, cosmic horror has continued on since then. Why did you think we needed another game?
I mean, it started from the idea that we wanted a free game, a short free game. So that's where it came from.
Interesting.
So it wasn't particularly me going, we want a new game, although there were things I did with Cthulhu Dark that I thought hadn't really been done before. So just to set it in a bit of historical context, so it's 2009, where we're still posting on Story Games, and at the same time I'd been doing a few Trail of Cthulhu scenarios, and there's a little movement at the time to write these free short games. Now, sometimes one-page games, sometimes a bit longer. So this was the time that John Harper released Lady Blackbird, which was this beautifully. I mean, it's an amazing game. Lady Blackbird is like lovely, glossy, but very self-contained game. And for a range of reasons, I thought, well, what if I could do that with a Cthulhu game? What if I could write a one-page Cthulhu game?
Is there a moment when it becomes more than that for you? And was that after you put out the one-page free version? Did it happen later? Because, I mean, it's a full-ass game now. It's not a one-pager. I'm wondering when it evolved from that beginning.
I mean, there's two different stories to tell, right? So there's the story about how the one-page version developed, and then there's the story about how that became a big hardback. And part of the second story is that is that people would joke about it. That they were like, well, you've written this one-page game. Obviously, you now have to release that as a 200-page. Now, I would say this to people at conventions. I was like, yeah, well, obviously, the next thing I'm going to do is release it as a big glossy hardback. And then once I'd said it, I should never joke about these things. Once I'd said it, I kept thinking, well, actually, yeah, you could start with the rules, and then you could add this and this and this, and then it just became this thing. And I hope we can take a moment to talk through sort of how all these things came together in the design.
I would love to.
Okay, so we're designing a one-page Cthulhu game, and how do I do that in my head? Well, I think the first stage, which I think is quite obvious, is you roll to find something out. You roll one die for free. You roll one die for your occupation. You roll one die for your skill, something like that. And I think, maybe you roll one die for equipment or something. I mean, you don't. But you roll those dice and, and that's some sort of success roll. I mean, so I think if you're designing a one-page Cthulhu game, are you with me on this? I mean, I think that's...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite easy.
Yep.
And so I think... And then I think all the interesting stuff comes into it. So... and also, I mean, what I do then is that rather than taking those dice and, adding the result up or counting successes, what I do is I stole a trick from Ron Edwards' game Sorcerer, which is you just take the highest die, and that's an interesting thing to do. It has an interesting thing associated with probabilities there, which are essentially that you don't get high results as often as you think.
Right.
Yeah. Which is quite interesting. Whereas if you if you just add the dice up, then you get very high very quickly. So, yeah.
Well, and you also get a bell curve that you don't necessarily get by taking the highest as well, which is interesting.
Yeah. And so that happens. And then but I think the interesting things about the mechanics are, so firstly, that you can't fail, which is, and that's probably come from Gumshoe, basically, because I mean, Gumshoe also has the thing that you can't fail an investigative roll. Well, you can't fail an investigation, and that does that by point spends. Right. You spend a point, you find the information, and I remember a conversation with Simon Rogers, who publishes Trail of Cthulhu, and I think he was complaining that like someone on the internet had been saying, "Oh yeah, I've got this hack of Gumshoe, except I use dice instead of points," and he was like, "Why do you do that?" And obviously he didn't say this, but he didn't say this online. But he was like, why would you play that? But then I think that lingered in my consciousness a bit, and I was like, well, I like rolling dice. How do you have a dice rolling system, but you keep the thing where you can't fail? Well, maybe what you do is the higher you roll, the more you find out. You always get what you need, but there's always room to get something extra. And I actually wrote a prototype game, and it wasn't a good game, which did involve rolling pools of d6s, and the high you always succeeded, but the higher you got, the better you did. And so I kept that for Cthulhu Dark, and so yeah, you roll a small number of dice, and the higher you roll, the better you do. But I think the thing that Cthulhu Dark does best, and I think this is probably it's pretty unique, this, I think, is that if you roll a 6, you succeed too well, and you glimpse the horror. And I think, that's very fun to play. If you've ever played Cthulhu Dark, it's really entertaining. You roll some dice, and if someone rolls a 6, everyone goes, ooh. And that's fun.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that particular little bit of inspiration came from, but I think that's sort of how the dice came together.
Well, and the other thing I find very interesting about Cthulhu Dark is how freeing the character creation is, and the ability to assign these die that, because I am a mechanic, I'm going to get a die for that, which I really love a lot. What I wonder, though, because I have not written for Trail of Cthulhu, I've never written for Cthulhu Dark. I've written nothing, but you have. What's different when you're creating a scenario for Trail of Cthulhu versus Cthulhu Dark? Is there no difference?
There's not much difference for me, because the scenarios I wrote were always quite bleak horror without combat. When I first started playing Cthulhu Dark, what I actually did was I took my Trail of Cthulhu scenarios and I ran them with Cthulhu Dark, and of course they worked really well. So from that point of view, I mean, if you're sort of saying what's the difference between a Cthulhu Dark scenario and a sort of traditional Call of Cthulhu scenario, I mean, there's lots of differences, but I think one important thing is that there's not really any combat. So you're enjoying the horror. You're not. It's not about sort of about fighting so much. And I think the other important thing is something which I later called creeping horrors. And so this is in the hardback book. So in Cthulhu Dark, a creeping horror is. It's a horror which it's sort of unconnected to anything, but anytime you roll a 6, it might creep up on you. So you roll a 6 and, I don't know, suddenly a voice talks to you in your head, or you get a smell of roses, or you get this deep sense that you're not meant to be here, or something like that. And so I think that's quite an important thing about Cthulhu Dark scenarios, which are that it isn't just about investigate, find what happened. It's every step of that investigation, the horror is sort of escalating around you.
What did you figure out about your one pager when you started working on the big book. When you revisit the game, you're expanding it.
Yeah.
Is there something that you discovered about your original creation that maybe you didn't recognize until you came back to it?
Not really. Actually, I'll tell you what, can we take a moment to talk about mathematics?
Please.
Because the stage we've missed out is lots of dice rolling, lots of spreadsheets. So we've talked about dice, but there was a lot of like sitting down, and that thing when you roll a 6, right? You know, when you roll a 6, you see the horror. You don't want that to happen every roll, because if you do, it's not going to be weird anymore. You don't want, I'm picking a lock. Oh, there's the horror again. There's a surprise. And so it really matters how often that happens. And so to do that, I had to think a lot about probability. And so, I mean, that's why if you write a Cthulhu Dark hack, it's quite important that there are only 1 or 2 dice that you roll. If you try and roll if you add like a die for equipment and a die for something else, it doesn't really work. Because at that stage, you're just rolling 6s all the time. In the original version of Cthulhu Dark, there was 1 die. You roll 1 die for free, you roll 1 die for your occupation, and you roll 1 die for a skill. And one thing I found out during playtesting was that we kept forgetting about that skill die. And so we just assumed you didn't. And I'd only put that in there because I thought people would want it. And so in the end, it just became 1 die, essentially for free, but if you're doing something within human capabilities, and 1 die for your occupation. If you are rolling like 3 dice every time, you just roll 6s all the time, and it's boring. So there was just a lot of mathematics. There was a lot of me sort of sitting there, sort of thinking about how the dice worked. There was Cthulhu Dark has insight rolls. They were called insanity rolls in the early stages, where your insanity starts at 1, and every time you roll higher than your insanity, it goes up by 1. There was a lot of thought about whether it should be higher than your insanity or equal or higher. And
interesting.
The reason it's higher is because it takes about 10 rolls to get to a 6. And otherwise it just rushes up too fast.
It is very interesting, that mechanic, because it becomes this very tense moment, and it's intense when it's called for, and it's very intense when you roll that die, especially as it gets harder and harder to roll over it. Right, it's even more intense, even though the chances of me rolling higher go down as it goes up. It is one of those things that I feel like you can't read Cthulhu Dark and understand that. You have to see that in play to be able to feel. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I really like that. And it's also the opposite of the way it works, I think, in Call of Cthulhu, but also I think Trail of Cthulhu, because I think they have a death spiral in that as your sanity leaves you, it gets harder and harder to succeed at those rolls. Whereas I do it the other way. And it's purely for narrative purposes. It's purely because it's interesting.
Yeah. It's very intense. You do the Kickstarter, you get it out there. People are talking about the game. People are playing the game. People are playing the game and you're not there. Right. They are just taking your words that you have written down, and now they're making it theirs, and they're doing it at the table. I'm always interested to hear about the feedback loop. Is there anything that came back to you after it was out in the wild that surprised you?
Someone was saying on Blue Sky recently that they've been on an escalator in John Lewis, which is a department store we had here, and behind them there were 2 teenage girls having this really excited conversation about star vampires, and he turned around to them and said, "Do you mind if I ask what you were playing?" And they said Cthulhu Dark, and that's just the best thing.
It's got to be amazing.
I love that. I was going to say that's the best thing, to be honest. Not particularly that people come back and say, "Oh, I've used it in a surprising new way." I'm just really, really happy when whenever someone plays it, and I feel really happy that people continue to play it, because it's getting, Cthulhu Dark's been about a while now, and the fact that you'll go to conventions and people will be running it, or someone will still mention it on a forum, I just feel incredibly lucky about all that.
The first time I came across it, Graham, is Jason Cordova from the Gauntlet. Jason is a very, very big fan of your game and speaks highly of it. And it was Jason who's first turned me on to it. And he often will do what we just talked about. He'll find a Call of Cthulhu scenario or a Trail of Cthulhu scenario, and he just runs it in Cthulhu Dark. It's just better in Cthulhu Dark, to quote Jason. And that's got to be a neat feeling, knowing that somebody has fallen in love with something that you've made like that and has championed it.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's really interesting that, because there was this whole sort of use of Cthulhu Dark, which I wasn't really aware of. And it started, I think, with Trophy Dark, which was Jesse Ross. Mm-hmm. So Trophy Dark is a horror hack of Cthulhu Dark, slightly different. And there were other trophy systems. And then I think that spawned a little bit of a culture of hacking those. But I was kind of unaware of that.
Interesting.
Kieran Gillen recently was on, he was saying on Blue Sky, and there was a bit of a history about this, but I'll cut the backstory. And he sort of said that Cthulhu Dark was quietly one of the most influential games of the last 15 years. And I was
shit.
like, well, okay. But I was like, that's really nice. But actually, if you said good games, I'd get you, but influential? I don't really get how it's been influential. And actually, a few people in my comments were kind of like, yeah, no, I think that too. And I was like, okay, can you explain to me how it's been influential? And a lot of them actually credited the Gauntlet with that.
Yep.
And credited this sort of, and I had a conversation with Jesse Ross afterwards, actually. By the way, I was out walking at the time, so you have to picture me standing in a field on this massive viaduct, having Blue Sky conversations with Jesse Ross, and he explained that whole loop, that actually that there'd been a lot of hacks of, so he did Trophy Dark, and then there's been a lot of hacks of that on the Gauntlet, and I just didn't know about that. And I'm absolutely delighted, but also really grateful to him and Jason and all of those people.
When you heard one of the most influential games and you asked a great question, which is, what does that mean? Right? Because that's something. What was told to you that convinced you that maybe they're right? What was their argument that Cthulhu Dark has been such an influential game? Because it's not just that Trophy Dark exists. It's not just that Trophy exists. There has to be another reason why somebody would peg that as one of the most influential designs.
No, I think that is because I think if you're saying it's influential as opposed to just popular or interesting or something like that, if you're saying it's influential, you have to sort of show that actually people have taken it and done something with it. And in my head, it wasn't really the case that people, there's been a lot of Apocalypse World hacks. You don't see people publishing Cthulhu Dark hacks very much, but actually there was a lot of that going on. Apparently,
that's cool.
Yeah. So on the Gauntlet, especially, there was Trophy Dark hacks.
And so let's talk about Trophy Dark just a little bit. As somebody to meet your grandchild when you read Trophy Dark, what was that like?
It's great. He's done a really great job with Trophy Dark, and I like the way he's found a new route into horror, which isn't Lovecraft. That's really great. I think at the time Trophy was published, I was falling out of love with Lovecraft. I mean, I was before I published Cthulhu Dark, to be honest. And I kind of went, oh, you've done horror, but you haven't used Lovecraft. That's really, really helpful. But yeah, Trophy's really good. And the thing one of the sort of secret agendas of Cthulhu Dark has always been that, people can publish their own stuff with it. And I like people to sort of email me first and ask me, but I always say yes. And I love it when people do it. And it was great, in particular with Trophy Dark, to see someone doing it and being so successful with it.
Yeah. I'm now going to bleed over. And is there a through line here? I want to talk about Cosmic Dark. And just very briefly, I want to read the blurb about it, but then I want to understand how we get from A to B. Because obviously Cosmic Dark is connected, but let me quickly read the blurb. Cosmic Dark is a game of weird space horror that tells stories of life, technology, and reality gone wrong. You play employees of Extraxa?
Extraxa.
Thank you, Extraxa, a mining and resource conglomerate. You've been sent to the galaxy's far reaches, a region dominated by capital G, the Glitch, an anomalous astronomical object like a golden wound. There's no character creation. You start playing straight away, making characters as you go. We're going to go back in time. Cosmic Dark is not on your radar. In no way does it exist anywhere in your brain. It's not itching at all. And then the itch starts. Can you give me a sense of if I take my daughter to the Graham Walmsley Museum tomorrow and I take her to the Cosmic Dark wing, and what's the first exhibit? Where did Cosmic Dark start to emerge for you?
I'd always thought about space. So when I published Cthulhu Dark, by the way, this is the first story which isn't really true, and then I have to tell you the second one, which is true.
Okay.
When I published Cthulhu Dark, there was always something in my head that I kind of went, what do I do next? What would be the next book? And, I knew I couldn't publish a particular historical period because Cthulhu Dark did all historical periods. There was a section in Cthulhu Dark for, there's a Victorian one and there was a medieval one. I was like, well, it's not, it's not like I can do, I don't know, 1850s Victorian London, which I would have loved to do, or Georgian England. And then I thought, but space, you could do it in space, and actually the book would kind of write itself, right? Because you could do a book like Cthulhu Dark, but with, so you'd have a chapter with like Azathoth in space and Nyarlathotep in space. I really didn't want to do that. I just... Because it's just boring.
Okay.
Partly because it's boring, and it would seem, I don't know, I wasn't interested in writing it.
Sure.
But also that I really didn't want to write Lovecraftian stuff anymore. And the sort of deal I'd made with myself for Cthulhu Dark was, all right, we're going to do Lovecraft, but we're going to be honest about the problems with Lovecraft, and we're going to try and do it in a new way. And then after publishing it, I was like, well, is that enough? And I would really, I mean, we're talking about Trophy Dark and sort of exploring horror in a new way. And I was like, well, can I explore horror in a new way? Can I find a new way to do it? And I think at the same time, I was getting into LARP a bit. And I kind of drifted a bit away from tabletop games. And it was only in about 2021 that, we were still pretty much in lockdown. And Scott Dorward invited me over to his Discord server. So he has a podcast, Good Friends of Jackson Elias. And he invited me over and said, lots of people are talking about Cthulhu Dark. You should come over. And I was like, really? Why are they talking about Cthulhu Dark? And I came over and people are very enthusiastic about Cthulhu Dark. And I ran and played a couple of games and really enjoyed it. They had an online convention. And I think at that point, the urge to write something new sort of came to me. And I'd also been reading a lot. I'd been reading a lot of J.G. Ballard, so his short stories. J.G. Ballard is a very surreal writer. What else? Solaris. So that I started talking about the Stanislav Lem novel, which is a very, again, has a sort of surreal, weird feeling. and then other things. There's a book by Olga Ravn. I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly, but called The Employees. And so I gradually realized that actually maybe I didn't have to like find another author and say, this is the Isaac Asimov role-playing game or something. I was like, maybe there is a genre of weird space horror that I can either explore or kind of invent myself. And then I wrote a scenario and play tested it, and it kind of worked.
So I've been listening to the APN8 Slade Nobody, and part of the reason I just instantly I need to read this game because when you're listening to the AP, what's not very clear is what is Graham just being Graham, and this is how Graham runs games. What is this is the game, and for example, like really was hooked immediately with the childhood prompts that happened at the very beginning. Is that part of the game? Yeah. So can we talk about that and where that came from? Because I found it very, very interesting.
Yeah. I was very interested in the idea of writing a game which had no character creation. I don't know where that came from. I kind of don't. But as in floating around, there's a game called Las Vegas by James Wallace, which also has no character creation. And I got to Las Vegas, and I'd never played it. I'd really like to play it. He does it through Amnesia, though. And obviously you can't use that in the start of. It's a bit harder for a campaign game. You can't, right. You've forgotten everything again. So that works in a very particular fictional context. I think also I'd been playing Night Witchers by Jason Morningstar, and
it's a hell of a game.
I love Night Witchers, absolutely love it. But there's a bit in that where there's a sort of one shot quick start thing in one of the packs, which essentially is sort of character creation through fiction. And and I emailed him and said, "Were you trying to do like character creation like in as part of the fiction?" He was like, "Yeah, I was." And so that came to me. I'm not quite sure the thought process was like this, but I think what was going on in my head was, well, okay, I want to do character creation and I don't want to use Amnesia. What can I do? And one of the obvious ways to do it is flashbacks, right? So, because I want to start the game. I want to start the game by going, you're descending to the surface of a planet, and then in Cosmic Dark, it goes, medical officer, please report, and then whoever says yes is the medical officer, that kind of thing. So I want to do that, but then I want to give them a chance to sort of flesh out their characters a bit more, and that's going to be very hard if they're exploring a scenario at the same time. So an easy way to do that is to flash back. And actually my first attempt, so the first draft of Cosmic Dark, had them going through training with Extraxer. And so for a long time, all those flashback scenes, they happened on board the Extraxer ship. And I was going, okay, so you started training and you're injured, and and let's start a conversation around that. And then what happened later? Well, I was like, well, hang on. People are talking about their childhood a lot. Let's tap into that, right? That's really powerful. So if I get them to like play through their childhood, that is going to give me a load of shit I can throw back at them later, and it's going to be really painful.
Well, and what I loved about it too, Graham, is how connected it also creates bonds. I mean, I listened to it in real time on the show where I watched these players just instinctively create bonds as they were making their characters. It's very fascinating. And it sounded to me like that was structurally part of the game as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, but if you think of a game like Fiasco, right, and sort of think about how character creation works in that, because again, character creation in Fiasco does not start by me going, I'm going to fill out my character sheet. One of the most important things is the relationships between characters. And I think as a fairly, if you wanted a kind of quick start character creation system, what you can do fairly quickly is kind of go, okay, I'm this guy, you're that guy, and now let's throw down some relationships between us. And so I actually do that in one of my games. There's a LARP I wrote called Will That Be All, which is about servants in a country house. And that literally works like that. So, you will take a card saying, I'm the butler, and, not very much background, but a little bit. And I will take a card saying, I'm the footman. But that's not quite enough to give us to start playing. We've got to have a relationship, so we've got something to play with. And so there are also some cards that put a relationship between us. Oh, and sorry. So yes. So that is deliberate about Cosmic Dark. So the first thing that happens is you choose your occupation. You're the medical officer. You're the engineer. But that's not enough to start with. There has to be a relationship. And so the easiest way I thought to create a relationship, but do it fictionally, is to get people to play a scene together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As you're doing this, as you're prompting them, as your players are starting to flesh out who they are, before the voice intrudes, what are you writing down as the GM? What is the kindling that you're going to burn later as they start having these conversations?
Oh, everything. Everything people say. Cosmic Dark starts with, you're in a ship descending to the surface, and then it flashes back and people talk about their childhood. And you'll notice that through that, I am asking questions, and I'm writing down the answers. And it says to do this in the rule book. It's,
Got it. That's what's key.
Oh yeah, I mean,
okay.
this is all part of what the GM is told to do. And what it says in the rule book is, ask questions and write down their answers. So for example, if I say to you, so you're from a slightly poor family, what are the things that you miss? And you say, I miss, I looked at richer families and they had better food. I'm writing that down, and then at some point in the adventure, we're going to have a conversation about better food. There's a scenario in Cosmic Dark about memory, and in that I will ask a lot of questions about, so what, so you're growing up. What's your favourite memory of your family? And that's family meals. And so family meals will definitely come back later.
So let's stick with that for just a second, so I can get a better sense of this, Graham. So I tell you, I remember family meals fondly. That's a great memory I have. You write down family meals. Can you give me a sense and just an example, right? Not prescriptive here, but how could I then use that against them? How could I then take that answer and use it later? I'm trying to get a better sense of that.
I'm going to need to give some spoilers for Cosmic Dark.
Okay. So, all right. So for those of you that don't want spoilers, then fast forward.
Ahead by 2 minutes. So, for example, transparency is a scenario about memory, and the what happens in transparency is you explore this vast abandoned spaceship, but as you explore it, you become more and more convinced that actually you grew up living on this spaceship.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's really nice. And so what will happen in that is that as you're walking through the living areas of the spaceship, I will say, there's a table over there, and you remember that's where you had your family meal. You see what I mean?
I do.
And that is really powerful. I mean,
yes.
In a sense, it seems quite cheap, right? Because all I'm doing is I'm bringing back this thing from earlier. I asked you this question earlier. Now I'm telling you what you said. But it's actually very powerful because I've just sort of connected the horror to your childhood.
Yep.
To you personally, but also to your childhood, and that pushes buttons.
Well, I think what I this is helping me a ton because I could tell listening to you run the game, I could tell the magic that was happening. There's something very magical that's happening in that play. And what was hard for me to discern, and you've done a wonderful job helping me, is I couldn't tell what was Cosmic Dark and what was just Graham is a really good GM, or what was just you have three pretty amazing players playing there, right? And it was difficult for me to understand. Again, it's why I need to get the book, because I need to read this thing to discern what it is. And what you're telling me, which I'm very excited about, is that in fact, this is the game. And what I'm listening to isn't necessarily a function of you or the players. It sounds like it's a function of Cosmic Dark.
Yeah, it is. And I've tried to codify more and more of that into the game itself. So if you read the hardback of Cthulhu Dark, what you'll find is that most of how I run Cthulhu Dark is in the GM advice section, including, I think, the thing about bringing things back. By the way, this idea of bringing things back, it's a Keith Johnston thing. It's called reincorporation. It goes right back to play Unsafe.
Isn't that something?
It's kind of a cheap storytelling trick. Well, no, it's not a cheap. It's a very powerful storytelling trick, which is that if you bring back something that you said earlier, it kind of creates this feeling of completeness, and it's a story thing. So, I mean, Cosmic Dark has a lot of that as well. So I'm holding a Cosmic Dark book at the moment, and and it does have a section. I'm just going to try and find it. There we go. It has a section called "Bring Things Back," which explains how to do what I've just done. But I think what Cosmic Dark, and a lot of that stuff was in Cthulhu Dark, but I think what I've done in Cosmic Dark is sort of codify a lot of that as part of the game. So every Cosmic Dark scenario starts with the night before your scenario, you go to, the night before your assignment, you go to sleep, and this voice, this computer voice asks you questions, and that is me deliberately putting something in the structure of the game that is going to give you those things to reincorporate later. So I'm not just relying on your GM skill to do that. I'm making sure the game gives you that.
So I was a little stunned that you just held up the book.
Yeah.
Like this thing is baked. It's done.
No, so this is right. This is the beauty of print on demand, right? So this is a proof. So I often order proofs from Drive-Thru RPG. But yeah, I mean, you can see this is basically written. It's basically edited. Look at that. I mean, so that's the cover. That's by a guy called Paul Bourne, Handiwork Games. He's brilliant. I love him, and it's pretty much done, really.
The other question I had, and you have, without me asking you, that you've answered, was one of the early questions I had was, why isn't this just a Cthulhu Dark scenario? Right? Why is it its own game? But I think you've answered that. Structurally, it seems very different. And it seems like as prescriptive as the world is, as prescriptive as the scenarios at a very basic level seem to be, there's multiple possibilities here. I'm also very, very happy to hear that there are multiple scenarios. There isn't just the one.
It's a campaign. So there's a campaign of 6 scenarios, which is a new thing to explore for me. So another of the things I was really conscious about Cthulhu Dark was that you mainly use it for one-shots.
Right.
And so one thing I've been really interested in exploring with Cosmic Dark is the idea of a campaign. So it does that. I mean, I think if you see the mechanics for Cosmic Dark, you'll be familiar with them if you've seen Cthulhu Dark. But the new things that Cosmic Dark brings to the table are there's no character creation. There's all these things like the psych assessment, which is the computer voice asking you questions. There's loads of stuff like that coming into play. There's a scenario structure. There's 3 levels to this. So there is loads of storytelling stuff it's doing that Cthulhu Dark didn't do.
So Cosmic Dark is an idea or a collection of ideas. I would imagine this wasn't the first time that you've had an idea or a collection of ideas. I would imagine there are ideas and collections of ideas that have never made it to where you're holding a book now that has this game. Do you remember, have a sense of when you knew Cosmic Dark was going to be something? It wasn't just some ideas floating around. It wasn't just, a couple jots in a notebook somewhere. Was there a moment where you're like, this is a game and I'm going to put this over the finish line and I'm going to put this game out? Do you remember if and when that happened?
Yeah, there's two things, I think. I mean, the first thing is the commercial aspect of it, right? So let's be upfront about this. I always had it in my head that if I did a space version of Cthulhu Dark, that might be quite a good thing for me to release. People might buy that, and I think a lot of publishers are doing that. And I also release things that I know people never buy. There's a whole section of queer history LARPs which I think has sold about 5 copies. So yeah, but I think in my head, I did actually just think, that, and with that title Cosmic Dark, that's quite good.
Yeah.
So there was that side of things. I don't want it to sound too cynical, but I mean, that thought was there.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I could have done that just after Cthulhu Dark, and I didn't.
Correct.
I think I wrote the first scenario, which was Extraction, and that was trying to bring in a lot of these. Well, it was trying to do the no character creation thing, and it was trying to do this weird space horror thing, which I was very excited about. And that scenario went really well. And so I think after that, I was like, yes, actually, weird space horror is this thing I can explore. And I think it's its own thing. It's not Cthulhu Dark in space.
Right.
There's a lot to this.
What was the challenge in going beyond a one shot to create something that is truly a campaign with scenarios that are connected? What was the challenge for you versus what you've made before?
It's a few different things. There was a personal challenge for me in the scenarios, which that I was also getting a bit bored of the way I wrote scenarios, because I noticed that a lot of scenarios I wrote went like this. You arrive somewhere, it's weird, you go to the weird place, you go down a big hole, you find, and to be fair on myself, there's a lot of very good scenarios that actually are like this.
Yeah.
And it doesn't particularly bother the players very much, but it was bothering me at the time, and I was like, well, I'm not sure. An Extraction is a little like that. It's a very good scenario, but it's a little like that. And so that was the first challenge. I wanted to find some new ways of writing scenarios, and I think I did. So, Time Murder, which is the second Cosmic Dark scenario, is about a murder mystery. There's one of them which is about exploring a mansion, which isn't exactly groundbreaking. There's a few Call of Cthulhu scenarios that have done that, but I haven't done that.
Right. And
so I really enjoyed that. There's exploring a spaceship. There's another one which is structured entirely around scientific discoveries. So that was part of it, me finding different ways to write scenarios. Mm-hmm. But I think I've actually just skipped your question, which was how did I make Cthulhu Dark or something Cthulhu Dark-like into a campaign game?
Right. What were the challenges?
Partly it's a change in narrative, which is that in a Cthulhu Dark one-shot, like a lot of Lovecraftian things, you expect everyone to basically either lose their minds or die. Mm-hmm. But if you watch a lot of space horror, if you watch Alien or Solaris or something like that, that's not quite what happens. What happens is you put the characters through hell and they come crawling out, but they survive enough. They're scarred, but they survive enough to fight to do the next scenario. And so that's how Cosmic Dark works pretty much that it bashes everyone down, and but afterwards there is a process they go through to get right again for the next scenario. Connecting them together into a coherent scenario is very how do you kind of write a campaign that that feels coherent as a campaign, but actually every story feels unique or self-contained is a really hard thing to do, and I've tried to do it before and failed.
Interesting.
I remember trying to do this sort of apocalyptic campaign where people would basically kind of drive across the United States, and the problem was they just wanted to drive across the United States rather than staying where they were and exploring the scenario. I think the key thing I have there, you said it in your blurb, right? So one of the things about Cosmic Dark is this: you're going to the far reaches of the galaxy, where is this object, this astronomical object, like a golden wound in space called the glitch. One of the things that works in a campaign way for Cosmic Dark is that the glitch is in every scenario.
Got it.
Doing something weird in every scenario. It's never the source of the weirdness. So, the end of the scenario is never that you fly your spaceship into space and destroy the glitch.
Right.
It helps it's a massive astronomical object, so nobody's tempted to do that. But that's one of the things. So there is this weird thing which links all the scenarios. The other thing is that the first 3 scenarios in the campaign are quite different, but scenarios 4, 5, and 6 all have an alien species which is similar. Different, but similar. And so there is this sort of growing thread of menace and alien species which comes together throughout the campaign.
So as you have been writing this, as you have been playtesting it, as you have been running it in early versions and far more baked versions of this, has there been anything interesting that you have gotten from people playing it that has changed the game? So was there ever something that someone noted, talked about, struggled with, or gushed over that made you realize I need to incorporate this into the game?
Playtesting definitely changed the game. I'm trying to think of a big way that playtesting changed the game, and I'm struggling to think of a massive one.
Think of a little one then.
Yeah. So I mean, there are some quite specific things. So. So Cosmic Dark starts by flashing back in time, and it has this little relationship scenes between these children growing up, and the first scene started with the line, "My leg's stuck. Can you help me?" And so actually, if you listen to the Ain't Slayed Nobody. You'll hear that line. So what happens is I give everyone a line to start the scenario with. I say, can you say this? And then we'll just run the scenario from there, which is just a nice way of setting up a scenario. And the problem was that if you start a scenario with the line, "My leg's stuck, can you help me?" This is how the scene goes. "My leg's stuck. Can you help me?" "Oh, yeah, just hang on. Oh, I'm going to pull it. No, it's still stuck. Okay, I'm just going to try and push it out. Okay, no, it's still stuck. Okay, well, I might go and get help then." It's a crap scene. It's really... Every scene goes like this, and it's just both of them going, "Oh, I'm going to try pulling my leg out. It's still a bit stuck." It's terrible. And so now, if you play Cosmic Dark... that line's gone now.
And interesting.
And so I can't remember what the line is instead. Let me find out.
So, but before you do this though, what was the goal? So it existed, and I hear it in the AP. What was your goal? Why did that line exist at all? What were you trying to do with that?
I'm trying to give people an easy way to start a scene, because what you've done is you've created these characters which you know very little about. So I've created a character, and I'm a medical officer. You've created a character, you're a communications officer, but you don't know anything about them. and now I'm going to put you back to your childhood and make you play a scene. Well, it's very hard to do that.
Yeah.
Right? It's very hard to start that from nothing. And so I've got to give you something. And so what am I going to give you? So I can give you a bit of setup, right? I can say you're playing together in the woods as a child or something. But even so, I don't want news people to freeze when I just say, start the scene.
Right.
And bearing in mind, by the way, I went to conventions and ran this game. So I literally have people sit down at the table. And I don't just want to go, okay, new people who have just sat down at my table, you're a medical officer. Go, start a scene as a child. That would just be rubbish. And so I found a good way to do it was to just give them a line to say to start the scene. And then what I found was that you have to give them the right kind of line.
Right.
So if you say, my leg's stuck, can you help me? It leads to a very bad scene. I think the new line is, it's time to go home. And that works really nicely.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah.
That's very, very cool. So everybody knows all the links are here. We are recording this and putting it out very quickly because we are crowdfunding it. I do want to take one quick more break, and I want to talk very briefly to you about, I'm done talking about the shit you make. We're done with that. I want to talk about the stuff you consume. We'll be right back.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Writer's Room, where you can find all sorts of adventures, antics, and escapades for the 7th Sea TTRPG. I'm Zoe Jackson.
I'm Evan Ackley.
And I am Patrick Keefe.
And we're here to tell you the stories of 7th Sea. If you enjoy actual play podcasts featuring adventure, drama, and swashbuckling heroism using music and dynamic sound effects, then you've come to the right place. Not only do we bring you stories from our 7th Sea gameplay, we also discuss the mechanics of the game in special episodes called Notes with the Narrator. To learn more, our Linktree link will be in the bio, and that will help you find us on your favorite podcatcher, as well as support us through our many different platforms. Won't you join us?
So Graham, this used to be kind of a thing that would always come up in my interviews, and I ended up having it be the end of all my interviews now because it creates a very interesting bookend. We started at the very beginning, you as a teenager discovering games. We've walked through the process you've gone through to become a creator. And now I want to finish by talking about, what do you consume? So your hope is that you find out that on a server somewhere, a lot of people are talking about Cthulhu Dark, and that's exciting. I want to know what for you recently has done what Cthulhu Dark has done for others. Is there something that you've watched, read, or played recently that has gotten its hooks into you and won't let go?
I've been reading a series of horror scenarios, Darkened Hill and Dale, by Sarah Cole, which are really, really good. I'm really into those, so I'll probably try running those.
What's interesting about them? Why? What's different?
They're sort of folk horror-ish, or at least, set in the English countryside horror. And a couple of them are very bleak, which I just really like. And so I feel they're kind of fitting into my headspace quite nicely. I like a bit of folk horror, and I really like. This is so hard to explain. It feels she's written some countryside horror that firstly feels as though it is actually set in the English countryside, and as well as that, feels as though it's not cliched at all. And I really like that. It's really good.
How do you define folk horror for yourself? Because it's a genre that I love, but it's a little tricky to try to explain to somebody why one thing can be folk horror, but the other thing isn't. Do you have a sense of that? Or is it just like pornography, you know it when you see it?
People have written books on this. Also, you said this was a short segment. You can't have this be a short segment and then say, how do you define folk horror? It doesn't work.
Shame on me.
No, it's famously a very difficult genre to define. It's I'm quoting from a book now, and I can't remember the title of the book. There are three sort of classic films, which are The Wicker Man, Witchfinder General, and Blood on Satan's Claw, and they sort of, there's connections between them. It's hard to sort of say what all the elements are, but there's some sense of isolation and remoteness. There's some sense in old beliefs. There's maybe a bit of fear of modernity, or a sort of thought that actually the primitives' beliefs, maybe there was something in them. All of those kind of things sort of mixed together, and I think it's very hard to sort of sit back and say what's folk horror and what's not, because actually, you can look back at things like 1970s public information films, which were a very particular. We had some very particular weird ones in the UK, and they seem quite folk horror, but it's quite hard to explain why they're folk horror, because they're modern day and everything. So, yeah.
So those are three classics, right? And it's often what I talk about when I talk to people about folk horror. How about have you ever seen Eggers' The Witch?
No, that's one of the ones I haven't seen. I've seen. What else have I seen? I mean, I've seen Nosferatu. We saw
The Northman is the other one, that the Viking one, which is the only Eggers movie I don't care for. But I'm alone in that, because a lot of people love that. Well, I can't figure out whether The Witch is folk horror or not. And I've spent way too much time thinking about it.
I have not seen it.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful movie called Ennis Men, which
I don't know that one.
Oh, you should try that. It's really, that's a very surreal, beautiful. Ennis Men is the name of an island, and there's hallucinations. There's not much explanation for the story. It's incredibly beautiful movie. I mean, I can't recommend it enough.
How about Midsummer? Have you seen Midsummer?
Yeah, it's just Midsummer was, I loved Midsummer. It was, I don't know. It's funny. I know some people just say, well, it's basically just The Wicker Man done again. I think it's beautifully. No, I don't agree with that. It's so beautifully acted to me. Florence Pugh's amazing.
Oh, so good.
So good. The very last frame of the movie, which I'm not quite going to say.
No.
I can say when she smiles. It is just lovely. But I feel so. It's a very clever movie as well, because I mean, so much of it has. I feel it's sort of. I don't want to say it's reinvented folk horror, but it does do a bit of that, right?
I think so too. And I think what I loved the most about it, and it goes right to that final scene, is that they didn't feel the need to tell me everything. They left so much room for me to invent myself as the viewer. I felt like I was participating in what's happening in its own strange way. Super unique.
The lovely thing about it, right, is it has this thing a lot of good folk horror does, which is, it's horrific, but at the same time, you kind of want to join up with the weird cultists. You kind of go, I know you're weird cultists, but I kind of see your point.
Yeah, in the same way that we sympathize to a certain degree with the people on the island in The Wicker Man.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. So let's go back to, I took us on an awful left turn, and I apologize. I want to go back to these scenarios that you have been reading and how they've stuck with you.
Yeah.
Can you give me an idea? So when you say are they scenarios to be run in a game?
Are they
stories?
They're scenarios you run in a role-playing game. Yeah.
Okay.
And
gotcha.
They're system independent. Although, honestly, Craig, they're system independent, but they would work really well in Cthulhu Dark. So people should like genuinely. I'm reading these and I get that's a Cthulhu Dark scenario right there.
Nice.
So I don't think it's how she wrote it, but there's a couple of them which are just really, really beautiful.
How about something else? Is there a movie you've watched recently that has stuck with you, or a TV series?
Movies. I'm reading actually more books at the moment, right? So there's a fantasy book club which has started in our local bookstore. which is great, and it's lovely, and because fantasy is not always my thing, right? I mean, I know this makes me like the worst role player ever, but I get into science fiction really easily. I get into horror quite easily, but fantasy, a bit of a push for me. But so it's really good for me to have a book club where, you know, basically I read a fantasy novel every month. And so I've been reading One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. Really genuinely lovely. If you like horror, there's this sort of trend of like gothic fantasy, which is really worth digging into. Have you read What Moves the Dead, which is by T. Kingfisher?
No, but I love the title.
Oh, you must. So it's a rewriting of Edgar Allan Poe's book, Fall of the House of Usher.
Interesting.
It's genuinely weird and creepy. I absolutely adore it. So there's this sort of gothic fantasy I've been really enjoying, but also One Dark Window has a gothic element to it, but it's also just a really well-written fantasy novel, which I love, and you know the characters don't feel cliched, and it's just lovely. So
what makes it gothic for you in a fantasy setting?
Gosh, yeah.
Another easy question.
yeah. You know, for someone that wants short segments, you're doing a lot of. Can you define this genre?
Thought that as soon as I said it.
It has a female protagonist, and that is a thing. Yep. So a lot of these fantasy novels have female protagonists growing up in a kind of old crumbling house. I mean, I'm more or less quoting tropes at you now, but there is this sense of that. Tell you what, do you mind if I don't go further describing gothic than there's a woman growing up in a big old house?
That gives me a sense of it. Have you read Between Two Fires?
No, but that has come up.
Yeah, I want you to add that to your list. I think it's fucked up enough that you would dig it. That book took me by surprise. And it's not that it's shocking for the sake of shock's sake, but it's been a long time since I've read a horror book that I had to stop reading and take a minute.
Oh,
there's a familiarity to the world. There's a familiarity to the tropes from a fantasy perspective. And like he does some things, and like I would be 3 paragraphs through it and I need a break. I think I need a break. And he also does something that I find so difficult to pull off, but God, I love it when it works, is to give me a story, whether it be in a movie or a TV show or in a book, where I don't like any of them. I don't like any of these people.
Oh, interesting.
But yet I still care. That's the hard part, right? It's easy to write a story. I've been bouncing off of White Lotus, because White Lotus is full of terrible people. And I found that I just don't care about them. Though that's changed a little bit in season 3. But then you've got like a show like Succession, which
I was going to say Succession.
Yep. A show about terrible people. Everybody's terrible, but yet somehow I cared about them. And he does this in Between Two Fires as well. So I want you to add that to your list. And then you have to email me when you're done reading it and tell me, Craig, that was the worst book I've ever read. I'm never going to take your recommendations again.
No, that's really good. Let me quote another couple of books. So reading God Killer, which to me
I've heard about it. I have not read it, but I've heard it's very good.
Really nice. Again, well-written fantasy novel, really lovely. And then I've recently read The Crimson Moth, which is, it's romantasy. It's hilarious. But it went, I actually have a real love of sort of romantic fiction. I really do.
Why is that?
Basically, Craig, you know how shit the world is at the moment?
All too well.
Well, look, so sometimes I just want something that goes down easily. I think it went back to a time where we went on holiday, went to a cottage, and I I think I'd forgotten my Kindle, or it broke. I think I'd forgotten my Kindle. And so I was stuck with what was in the cottage. And there was a romantic fiction novel. And I was like, all right, I explore narratives. This is a thing I do. I'm going to read romantic fiction. And of course, it was lovely because it was, it was written, so it's easy to read. It's a lovely thing to read. If it's written right, you like the characters. Mm-hmm. And the best written ones have a way of actually sort of exploring human emotions as part of them. And so what I've been getting into particularly recently is that particular tiny subgenre of romantic fiction where you inherit an old shop and you have to go and run it, which is totally a thing.
Wow.
It's the best known one is called the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, which actually I wasn't a massive fan of. And but there's a woman called Jenny Colgan who writes a lot of stories where you inherit an old bookshop and you have to go and run it, and then you inherit a little bakery and you have to on an island and you have to go and run it. It's brilliant. It's just really lovely.
Part of the reason I love this segment, Graham, is that I always find out like there's whole worlds I know nothing about. And like that genre that you just talked about, no idea that was a thing and that exists. And I love discovering that there's more out there that people are passionate about that I didn't even know existed. I don't know why I love that, but I just love knowing that there's slivers of the world with that a genre about inheriting a shop, and that's what the genre is. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And it does get, partly I just love stories and I like taking them apart and go, oh, so what are they doing there and how does that work? But one thing I really like about it is that you can tell some really deep stories. I mean, there's a segment in what's it called? I think The Little Bakery by the Sea or something like that, where the Little Beach Street Bakery it's called, and there's a segment in that where there is a fishing accident and someone is lost at sea and there is a bereaved woman. And it's quite hard hitting, really. But isn't it brilliant that there's a genre which you can read for pleasure and it's fun, it's entertaining, but actually it's tapping into these really deep places. And I find things like that very powerful.
Do you have a hard time turning off the writer and creator part of your brain and just enjoying something? Or are you reading books like this and picking them apart at the same time?
It's the second one, and I think it's a pleasure for me, to be honest.
Sure.
I mean, no, there are things that I will read and and I enjoy, but I think part of the pleasure for me is sometimes working out how the story is constructed.
That's cool. That's very, very cool. Graham, there's a lot of things you can do on a Sunday afternoon, like go get lost in a cabin with a broken Kindle and find a new fantasy romance novel about a shop by the sea. But you decided to spend it with me, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that.
It's been a pleasure. Really, really enjoyed this. Yeah.
And for those of you listening, guess what? This is the end. You listened to the whole damn episode, and I appreciate you doing that. So do me a favor and take care of yourself today. And if you got a couple extra spoons, take care of somebody else. God, it's so cool for me to learn. I'm so glad I listened to the AP before I talked to you.
Yeah, me too. It's really great,
I really am, because it's I just didn't know what was the game. And as excited as I was to get the game before, now I'm far more excited, realizing how much of it's codified in the book. It's very exciting. Very, very exciting.
Cool.
Short segment. I want to be conscious of your time. Speaking of which, do you still have another 5-10 minutes?
Oh yeah, it's
Okay,
fine.
okay.
We don't have to. We can go a little beyond 4
Wonderful.
as well. It's absolutely fine. So I'm going to get up and walk away and come back just
Please.
so I'm clear my head a bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Graham, you are a very good guest, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I should have warned you that I will go off that call sheet very,
fine.
very quickly.
I just have to make a mental note not to hold myself back and go, no, I'm going to say that later.
No, please don't. Yeah. We got there though, Graham. We figured we got the rhythm going, and we were just talking to each other, which is what which I strive for. So, it was a really good segment. All right, I will bring us back.
Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over, and you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast, too, while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.